the jury has found the defendants guilty of first-degree murder. This means we will proceed to the penalty phase. We're going to start that Monday at 1 o'clock in the afternoon, all right? So you all have not yet been discharged from your service as a juror. So therefore, you are not to discuss anything with anyone about this case. You're not to do any independent research. You're not to read, listen to, watch any news accounts related to this case.
Everybody needs to hear this right now because the second Isaiah Chance stepped into prison, the story people thought they knew started looking real shaky. Reports and online talk quickly started spreading that his first moments inside were rough, and suddenly the image tied to his name started getting questioned hard. Think about that for a second. This is the same man prosecutors said helped coordinate the murder of Charles Jones, also known as Julio Foolio. This is the same man who spent months wearing an ankle monitor while investigators tracked movements and built their case. Then his own mother took the stand and described him as quiet, reserved, and helpful around the house. That picture and the image from the streets did not match up at all, and people instantly started asking questions. Now here's where it gets wild. His own defense attorney stood in front of the jury and basically said Isaiah was an aspiring rapper with no gang tattoos, no documented gang membership, and no weapons directly tied back to him. The defense angle was not some super tough street legend story either. It was closer to, he's just a lost kid. That was the play they brought into court. The people fighting for him were practically telling 12 strangers that he was a regular young man who got caught around the wrong crowd at the wrong time. But that argument did not move the jury. He was still found guilty of first-degree murder and still faced the possibility of the death penalty. That courtroom pressure hit different, and his whole world got flipped upside down fast. But this story goes way deeper than one person and one courtroom battle. People started looking at the situation like a mask getting peeled off layer by layer. One image was being pushed publicly, while another picture was being painted inside court documents and testimony. That contrast had everybody talking because the energy looked completely different once the spotlight got turned all the way up. This whole situation carried drama from every direction, and the details only got heavier as more information came out. To understand how all this even started, we gotta jump back to Jacksonville, Florida, where investigators and reports have described years of serious violence connected to rival groups. For a long time, a lot of people outside the city barely paid attention until Foolio's name started getting major attention across the country. On one side was 6 Block, also known as KTA, a crew deeply tied to Foolio's music, image, and online presence. Charles Jones was described as more than somebody loosely connected to. Detectives testified that he held a high-level position within that movement, comparing his status to how Youngin Ace sat near the top of ATK on the opposite side. Then you had ATK and their allies, a group called 1200. Investigators said this tension was not some random rap issue that appeared overnight. Testimony referenced incidents stretching back years, including shootings and killings tied to an ongoing conflict. Then Isaiah Chance entered the frame. At 23 years old during trial proceedings, prosecutors publicly described him as a member of ATK and pointed to phone records, social media activity, and even a Twitter Spaces exchange involving him and Foolio that investigators preserved because they believed it showed documented tension between the two men before the murder. There was a whole recorded argument between Isaiah Chance and Charles Jones playing out online for everybody to see. This wasn't some hidden conversation buried in private messages either. Investigators from the JSO gang unit were already watching, already paying attention, and already aware there was tension between the two men. That heat was sitting out in public view, and according to testimony and evidence discussed during the case, it became another piece added to a much bigger picture. But here's where the story takes a sharp turn because parts of the public image being pushed did not completely line up with what his own defense team argued in court. The attorney hired to fight for Isaiah Chance's life stood in front of the jury and said, "Isaiah Chance is not connected to any gangs. None of the weapons recovered came back to him. None of the clothing came back to him. He doesn't legally qualify as a documented gang member because he doesn't even have the tattoos to signify it." That was the argument placed right in front of the courtroom. They also pointed out that the arresting JSO officer did not formally document him as a gang member. Then things got even deeper during the penalty phase. His mother took the stand while her son's future was hanging in the balance and described him as caring and reserved. She said she never personally saw him involved with gang activity or around weapons. She also testified that she had sought help for him when he was younger because of speech issues, and said he did not start speaking until he was 4 or 5 years old. Then another father figure in his life testified that Chance had talked about wanting to become a merchant marine, wanting to travel, and wanting to build a life with purpose. Now keep this in mind. The jury heard all of that and still found him guilty of first-degree murder. That outcome did not change, but what made people talk was the contrast between the image discussed in court and the image many people had tied to him publicly. Prosecutors presented him as someone who played a key role in helping coordinate events connected to the murder case, even though they did not accuse him of being the person who fired the shots directly. According to the prosecution's case, his alleged role was tied to tracking movements and helping identify locations. Investigators pointed to actions involving a silver Chevrolet Cruze and phone activity they argued helped locate Foolio that night. That role became a major part of the case prosecutors built. Now this is where the timeline gets heavy because every detail from June 23, 2024 started drawing attention. Foolio had turned 26 on June 21st, just 2 days before his death. Earlier, he had posted online with the spirit of, "God, thank you for allowing me to see another year." He was celebrating another birthday, showing gratitude, and enjoying another chapter of life in circumstances where reaching another year was never something people viewed as guaranteed. Foolio had put flyers on Instagram on June 14th, 9 days before everything happened, promoting his birthday celebration in Tampa. He announced he had rented an Airbnb and shared details that made it easy for people to know where he planned to be. According to prosecutors, those posts became a major turning point in the case. They argued that once the birthday information went public, the defendants began putting together a plan connected to Charles Jones. Investigators said this was not some last-second move or random situation that happened overnight. The state argued there were 9 full days to organize, prepare, and map out what would happen next. According to the prosecution's timeline, the group drove from Jacksonville and arrived in Tampa on June 22nd, the day before the shooting. Investigators said they were already in the city, waiting and watching. Then June 23rd arrived, and Foolio was out celebrating his birthday weekend. Testimony and evidence presented during the case described him and people around him moving through different locations in Tampa, including teasers and other spots around the city. By all appearances, he was out enjoying himself and celebrating another year. But prosecutors said something else was happening in the background at the same time. According to the state's case, Isaiah Chance and his girlfriend, Alicia Andrews, were traveling in a silver Chevrolet Cruze and following the movements of Foolio and his group throughout the night. Surveillance footage reportedly placed them at 2 separate locations where Foolio and his crew had also been present. During closing arguments, prosecutors said they believed the purpose was not entertainment or partying. Their argument was that the pair were there to locate, observe, and report information back. Then investigators focused attention on another vehicle, a Chevrolet Impala, which prosecutors connected to the alleged shooters. Authorities identified Sean Gathright, age 20, along with Davion Murphy, 29, and Rashad Murphy, 32. According to evidence presented at trial, investigators said weapons recovered in the case included AR-style rifles and a Glock pistol with an extended magazine. As the night continued, Foolio reportedly left the Airbnb after there were too many people around, and later attempted to get a room at Home 2 Suites near the University of South Florida on McKinley Drive. Prosecutors argued that this location became the final stop in the timeline they laid out. Investigators said surveillance footage showed Chance exiting a vehicle and making a phone call before the Impala arrived. Then came the part of the case that jurors had to carefully watch and process. Prosecutors said the men exited the vehicles wearing masks and gunfire erupted in the parking lot. Authorities recovered 31 9mm shell casings from the scene, and investigators testified that brass catchers had reportedly been attached to rifles to reduce the amount of evidence left behind. Prosecutors pointed to those details as signs of planning and preparation rather than a random act. Authorities said the vehicle carrying Charles Jones attempted to leave the scene, but investigators reported that additional shots were fired. The vehicle was later found heavily damaged by gunfire. Charles Jones suffered fatal injuries and was pronounced dead at the scene, while 3 other individuals were injured. Afterward, investigators said the group separated and traveled in different directions. According to evidence presented during trial, Chance, Andrews, and Rashad Murphy reportedly took an Uber back to Jacksonville, while license plate readers and surveillance technology helped investigators track other movements. Then another detail entered the picture that investigators viewed as a major break in the case. Isaiah Chance was still wearing an ankle monitor from an unrelated matter, and authorities said that digital trails suddenly became very important. When detectives went to a house on Captiva Bluff Road in Jacksonville looking for Isaiah Chance, investigators said they did not just walk up and get an immediate response. According to court records and testimony discussed during the case, authorities surrounded the property, announced themselves, and gave instructions for around 15 to 20 minutes before Chance and Alicia Andrews eventually came outside. Prosecutors viewed that moment as important because they argued it fit into a larger timeline they were building around the investigation. Then another detail from court documents grabbed attention. Investigators said Chance told a JSO detective that once he got off his ankle monitor, he wanted to leave the state and disappear. That statement started raising eyebrows fast. People immediately looked at that and started asking questions because prosecutors had already painted a picture of somebody deeply tied to a major case involving the murder of one of Jacksonville's most talked about rap figures. According to the state's theory, this was not somebody talking about standing tall or staying around for the long run. Prosecutors pointed to that statement as a sign that pressure was closing in from every direction. Then attention shifted toward the behavior of multiple defendants during the legal process because some moments in court had people stunned. First came Sean Gathright, who was 18 years old when he was initially arrested. Prosecutors identified him as one of the alleged shooters from that night. According to evidence discussed in court, surveillance footage from the hotel allegedly captured him as one of the gunmen involved in the shooting. Investigators also testified that weapons and ammunition linked through forensic evidence connected to the case had possible ties to other incidents, including an October 2023 attempt on Foolio's life and another homicide investigation from 2022. Then things got even more dramatic inside the interrogation room. Surveillance footage reportedly showed Gathright pacing around after his arrest before doing something that had jurors looking twice. According to testimony, he climbed onto a table and allegedly tried to escape through the ceiling of the interrogation room. Through the ceiling, investigators said jurors were shown that footage during trial proceedings. The image prosecutors highlighted was a sharp contrast. Somebody accused of carrying out a violent act, now appearing desperate to get out of an interrogation room situation. The courtroom itself also had moments that drew attention. During proceedings, reports described disruptions in behavior serious enough that officers had to step in. According to accounts from the trial, one defendant had to be escorted out in handcuffs following an outburst. Then, after the jury returned guilty verdicts on May 8, 2026, reports stated that Gathright became emotional in court and had to be escorted from the room by a bailiff. That moment became another scene people discussed because emotions were running high from every side after a verdict, carrying major consequences. Now attention turns to Rashad Murphy, who at 32 years old was the oldest person among those charged in the case. According to testimony from detectives, investigators reviewed social media posts made after the murder. One post reportedly showed Tom Brady and Bill Belichick celebrating a Super Bowl win, while another said, "Hate me kindly." Detectives testified that they interpreted those posts as celebratory messages connected to Foolio's death, though those interpretations were presented as part of the investigation rather than definitive proof of intent. Murphy also sat down with detectives after his arrest, and according to testimony, investigators said his explanations began changing as more information was presented. Authorities stated he initially denied ever being in Tampa at all. Then investigators reportedly placed cell phone records and surveillance evidence in front of him, and detectives said his story began shifting. They even testified that he switched the hand he was writing with during the interview, something investigators claimed stood out because surveillance footage from the shooting appeared to show a gunman using his left hand. And during Davian Murphy's interrogation, prosecutors pointed to another moment that got attention during the case. According to reports from the interview room footage, cameras captured behavior that investigators believed looked like him acting out shooting motions while inside the police station. That image quickly became another piece people talked about because it added to a growing list of moments that raised eyebrows throughout the legal process. Now look at the pattern people started focusing on. Throughout the investigation and trial, There were emotional reactions, unusual behavior in interviews, social media activity, and courtroom moments that had everybody talking. Some people online looked at those scenes and started saying these actions did not match the image of hardened street figures that often gets pushed on social media or in music culture. The conversation started shifting towards something bigger. A lot of people argued that some young men can grow up surrounded by certain environments, absorb certain images, and build identities around what they think that life is supposed to look like without fully understanding where those choices can lead. And Isaiah Chance became a major example people kept bringing up during those conversations. This was the same person whose mother testified that he was quiet and attended church. She spoke about early speech issues and described him in a very different way from the image many people had tied to his name online. Then testimony from another father figure described dreams of becoming a merchant marine, traveling, and building a future with purpose. On top of that, his own defense attorney argued that gang documentation connecting him officially did not exist. Those details created a sharp contrast that had people debating two very different pictures of who he really was. The internet picked up on all of it fast once trial coverage started spreading everywhere. As people watched court TV clips, heard testimony from family members, listened to emotional statements, and followed every development, social media lit up with reactions. A large number of people began pointing toward what they believed was a bigger issue involving identity, influence, and environment. The discussions started sounding less like simple arguments about one individual and more like debates over how people become shaped by the worlds around them. Then the story moved into another phase, because once a first-degree murder conviction happens in a major case involving a well-known rapper and years of documented conflict, public attention rarely stops at the courtroom doors. The Foolio case had reached far beyond Jacksonville. Trial coverage was streamed, clips were shared across platforms, and people in hip-hop circles followed nearly every update. By that point, names, faces, and details connected to the case had already become widely recognized. Inside correctional systems, information can spread quickly too. News coverage reaches people in different ways, family members stay in contact, and conversations travel from place to place. On top of that, Jacksonville street politics had already been discussed publicly for years because of the long-running conflict involving groups like 6 Block, ATK, and 1200. Investigators had described violence connected to that conflict stretching back over a long period of time, and Foolio had become one of its most visible figures through music and public attention. His death did not erase years of history surrounding those tensions. So when people online began speculating about what prison life might look like for the men convicted in this case, those conversations exploded fast. But it's important to separate verified facts from rumors. Claims about what happened immediately after transfers into prison have circulated heavily online. But public speculation and social media stories can move much faster than confirmed information. What is clear is that entering prison with a high-profile case attached brings major attention all by itself. And for Isaiah Chance specifically, prosecutors argued he played a role in helping events unfold, even though they did not accuse him of being one of the shooters directly. Once someone enters a correctional system carrying national headlines, people already know the case, already know the names, and already know the allegations attached to them. Inside those environments, reputation and public attention can follow somebody through the door from day one. And conspiracy charges in the legal system are treated as serious matters regardless of whether a person is accused of firing a weapon directly or playing another role. In the legal system, prosecutors argued that every role connected to a murder case carries serious weight. Whether someone is accused of being the shooter or helping coordinate events behind the scenes, conspiracy charges and participation allegations are treated as major offenses under the law. And in a case this high profile, public attention can stay attached to everyone involved for a very long time. Sean Gathright, who was 18 when he was first arrested and later 20 during the trial process, entered a situation where his name had become connected to a nationally discussed case. The Murphy brothers, both over 30 and discussed in court alongside allegations of gang affiliations and controversial social media activity, also faced the reality that major public cases leave a long trail behind them. Once names become attached to nonstop news coverage, courtroom streams, and social media discussions, people tend to remember every detail for years. But another massive issue was still hanging over all of them at the same time. The penalty phase began on May 11, 2026, and the same jury that had already listened to the evidence and returned guilty verdicts now had another decision in front of them. Florida prosecutors were asking for death penalty recommendations. These were the same 12 jurors who had watched surveillance footage, reviewed phone records, listened to testimony, and spent hours reaching their original verdicts. Now the stakes had climbed even higher. Under Florida law at the time, at least 8 of the 12 jurors would need to agree before a death recommendation could move forward. Prosecutors laid out aggravating factors they believed supported that argument. They described the case as premeditated, coordinated, and targeted. Prosecutors argued that multiple firearms were used, that efforts were allegedly made to reduce forensic evidence, and that movements across cities and locations showed planning rather than something random or spontaneous. They pointed to surveillance, travel patterns, and the sequence of events throughout the night as key parts of that argument. Then the defense teams shifted attention toward the personal backgrounds of the men involved. Family members and people close to them took the stand and spoke about who they believed these men were outside of headlines and court documents. Sean Gathwright's grandmother described him as a good kid. His stepfather called him smart and inquisitive, while his sister became emotional while testifying. Other testimony described difficult family situations and challenges growing up. Davion Murphy's defense brought up learning difficulties and said he had attended 14 different schools after being moved through multiple homes. Isaiah Chance's side also presented testimony about his life and future goals. Family members described a positive relationship with him, and testimony was given saying he had talked about wanting purpose and had considered a future as a merchant marine, traveling and seeing the world. Then Sean Gathwright addressed the courtroom, himself during the penalty phase, and said, "I'm not here to dispute anything. I'm here to be a man and take responsibility and express my feelings about this whole situation. I feel very remorseful. This is a terrible situation. It's been a traumatic experience." Those words instantly became a major talking point because people began debating whether the emotions shown were completely genuine, partly influenced by the moment, or something else entirely. But at the center of everything was Charles Jones, known as Foolio, who was 26 years old and celebrating his birthday before his life was cut short. Investigators said he suffered fatal injuries during the shooting, while others were also injured that night. After the guilty verdicts came back, Foolio's mother, Sandricus Mays, publicly reacted online and posted, "Justice for Julio, the right get back, guilty as charged." That message spread fast and became another emotional moment in a case that had already kept people locked in from beginning to end. "We all gonna cry together. What they say? Pop a bottle of Don Julio. Let's drink up." That reaction hit hard online. Foolio's mother had spent nearly 2 years waiting, grieving, and following every turn in this case. And when the guilty verdicts finally came back, emotions poured out in a major way. For families connected to cases like this, courtroom decisions are not just headlines or trending topics. They become years of pain, waiting, and hoping for some kind of closure. Now pull the camera back for a second, because this case turned into a huge lesson on several different levels. First, social media can change situations fast in ways people do not always think about. Charles Jones promoted his birthday trip to Tampa on Instagram on June 14th and shared details about where he planned to be. Prosecutors argued during trial that those posts became a key part of how events later unfolded. According to their timeline, once information became public, people allegedly started watching, tracking, and making moves. The state's argument painted a picture where online posts became pieces of a larger chain of events. That reality got a lot of people talking because once something is out there, you never fully control who is watching. Second, there was another conversation that exploded online after people heard testimony and watched trial coverage. A lot of people started discussing how social media and internet culture can shape identities, especially for younger people trying to fit into certain environments. Some people online argued that images, music, and online attention can sometimes create pressure to live a role that feels bigger than reality. Isaiah Chance became part of those conversations because his own defense team described him as somebody with no gang tattoos, no documented gang membership, and no weapons directly linked back to him. They described an aspiring rapper and presented a picture that looked very different from how many people had viewed him publicly. But prosecutors presented something completely different. They argued he was closely connected enough to the situation that he became part of actions that eventually carried massive consequences. For many people watching, that contrast became one of the biggest discussions from the entire case. People started saying this looked less like a story about image alone, and more like a story about how being close to dangerous situations can eventually pull someone in deeper than they expected. Third, public attention does not disappear. The second a trial ends, high-profile cases follow people long after court dates are over. Foolio had become a major figure connected to Jacksonville's long-running conflict, and opinions around him were always strong. Some people supported him heavily, others criticized him, and emotions around his death remained intense from every direction. Because of that, discussions online continued long after the verdicts were announced. Rumors, speculation, and reactions spread everywhere, especially regarding what life might be like for the convicted men moving forward. But separating verified facts from online stories matters because speculation can grow fast once a case reaches this level of attention. And another thing people debated heavily online involved Sean Gathright becoming emotional in court after the verdict. A lot of people started mocking him across social media, but others looked at it differently. He was 18 years old when this case began, and people argued that regardless of what someone is accused or convicted of, facing consequences at that level is life-changing. But another argument immediately followed behind it. People said those emotions, fears, and thoughts about consequences needed to happen much earlier. Before plans were allegedly formed, before cars were moving, and before weapons ever entered the picture. That became one of the biggest contrasts people pulled from this entire story. On one side there was image, online energy, and public persona. On the other side there was courtroom reality, consequences, and lives changed forever. As testimony unfolded and verdicts came down, many people watching felt like the gap between those two worlds became impossible to ignore. The attempted ceiling escape, the social media posts that investigators said looked celebratory, the courtroom outbursts, the testimony about dreams of becoming a merchant marine, the tears after the verdict, and the statements of remorse to the jury. Put all of those moments side by side, and a larger picture starts showing itself. Remove the music world, remove the online image, remove the gang conflict discussions, and what remains is a case involving 4 men between the ages of 20 and 32 who were convicted in connection with a premeditated act that took a life and permanently changed many others. And one detail hit people especially hard. Sean Gathright was only 18 years old when prosecutors said he traveled to Tampa carrying out his role in these events. That became one of the biggest tragedies people kept talking about around this entire case. Not just the loss of Charles Jones, but also the reality that multiple lives ended up completely altered by decisions that unfolded in a very short amount of time. As this video drops, the penalty phase remains one of the biggest parts of the story. 8 jurors would need to agree for a death penalty recommendation to move forward under Florida law at that time. The state process would ultimately determine what comes next for the men convicted in this case, and that decision carries enormous weight for everyone involved. At the center of all of it was Charles Jones, also known as Foolio. He was celebrating his birthday weekend. He promoted events, booked places to stay, spent time with people around him, and was moving through Tampa enjoying life. Then, according to investigators, everything changed in a hotel parking lot on McKinley Drive. Authorities said gunfire erupted, dozens of rounds were fired, and Charles Jones never made it to see age 27. 3 others were also injured that night, making the impact of those moments reach even further. Prosecutors argued that people involved in different roles, whether through planning, tracking movements, or carrying out actions directly, all became tied to the consequences that followed. And those consequences stretched far beyond one night because criminal cases at this level can shape the rest of a person's life. Now the conversation moves to you. Drop a comment below and tell me what you think. Do you believe life in prison is the right sentence? Or do you think the death penalty should apply in a case like this? Hit the like button, share this video with somebody who wants the full breakdown, and subscribe if you want more deep dives into stories making major headlines right now.